Hello, everyone. It's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland Reviewer. And welcome to the Wasteland, my weekly show where I take a deep dive into a particular film, and there's end in sight. We're in the late 90s now of Scorsese and talking about Kundun, and we have Rowan here, one of my fellow SiftPop writers, here to join me again on the show. Rowan, thank you for coming back.
Of course, a pleasure as always. It
And
seems like I was just here yesterday.
basically 2 weeks ago,
Yeah, yeah.
we did a little bit of Age of Innocent. I took a little break and did some Casino with Frank, and then back at it again with Rowan. So there we go. And then I'm pretty sure I'm going to be messaging Foster after this because he's my next one.
Nice.
Rowan and Foster, the two MVPs here, popping in and helping out whenever. So much
Anytime,
appreciated.
anytime. Yeah, of course.
So before I jump into our three parts of the show, Rowan, would you like to shamelessly plug anything for all of our lovely viewers out there?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked, Shane. I have my own film website, film and television, just general pop culture. That's called The Lenient Critic. That's at thelenientcritic.com. I just had that domain, successfully nabbed. I was having some issues with it before, but I got it. So I'm at thelenientcritic.com, and I have a podcast that I will have Shane on at some point, as soon as I can figure out something to do on that podcast that he doesn't do on his own show.
I'm open to whatever. So
yeah. And so you can find that at any podcast player, Apple Podcast, Spotify. That's the Lenient Critic podcast. Pretty self-explanatory. And yeah. So that's what I got going on.
Yeah, I saw Foster was on. I'm like, Foster's getting around.
Oh yeah. Foster is my most prolific guest because he's usually the most available.
There you go. Having a lot of fun talking about movies and TV shows, which is a nice segue into our opening segment, which is coming attractions. So, Rowan, breaking the mold because, we're still in January and maybe we don't want to pick one of the trash movies that's coming out to talk about. So, Rowan, what's the show that you want to turn everybody on to that's coming out this weekend?
I feel like this should be my thing now. While I'm on this show, I don't promote movies. I only talk about TV shows. I am going to talk about The Gilded Age, which is a brand new HBO series that is premiering Monday, the 24th, I believe. Wait, no, hold on. That's not right. Wait, is it? I don't know. Time is and dates are weird. But
premieres Monday, January 24th.
24th, I got it. Yay.
Yep.
So The Gilded Age, it is about the American Gilded Age. It is from Julian Fellows, who is probably best known as the creator of Downton Abbey. I really don't know too much about the show beyond the cast. There's Christine Baranski, Carrie Coon, Nathan Lane, Morgan Spector, some pretty solid stars there. The trailers have just made it look like Downton Abbey, but in the Gilded Age and in America. But honestly, I've never seen Downton Abbey, but this show looks pretty great, and it's HBO. HBO doesn't usually miss when it comes to their original programming, so I am quite excited about this show.
It's a busy time for HBO with Euphoria and Righteous Gemstones back.
Absolutely.
And then this coming out on Monday, so a lot of time to spend watching some HBO. Oh, yeah. Honestly, the past couple of weeks, TV's been a little slow, but things are picking back up again. Yeah. Holiday's over. Time to get back to TV.
Right.
Now, my pick, so I did wind up picking one of the movies that came out this weekend, which the funny thing is, besides this redeeming love movie that just randomly popped up as a release for this weekend, I've seen all of the other films coming out this weekend. I'm going to mention The King's Daughter, only because is it objectively a good movie? It is weird as hell. And just watching Pierce Brosnan hamming it up as a king with this long flowing hair and his best buddy, William Hurt, as a priest. The two of them are worth the whole entire movie. Like, just watching them. Did I care about the mermaid? There's a mermaid in it. But
that's for sure.
Yeah, and there's a second movie in January that completely wasted Bing Bing Fan. So there you go. Because she got wasted in the 355 too. But this is just a weird movie. And like if you're into fantasy and you don't take yourself too seriously, I think you could have some fun with this. So that's the only reason I'm bringing up this one. But you know, it's January. We're finally back to like traditional January where it really is a dumping ground.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, there was a brief respite from that with Scream, and now it's just back to trash. So
oh, Scream. I have so many thoughts. I had so much fun.
me
Like,
too. Me too.
wrong weekend. We're not talking about that weekend. So
Unfortunately.
some weird movies, but A Hero is coming out on Amazon Prime. And I didn't want to talk about that for a second time as my coming attraction, which is why I didn't pick it. But definitely top tier international film award contender for the Oscars. So go check it out. But what we're here to talk about this episode is probably one of Scorsese's least known films. And there's probably a reason for that, which I'm going to get to in a minute, is Kundun, which is the second part of his really deep faith-based trilogy that he did with The Last Temptation of Christ, this, and Silence. Now, before we jump into talking about it, I really felt like I had to say something about this because like I do minimal research. Every time like I'll bring up Wikipedia while I'm sitting and watching the movie. I'm like, what are some interesting behind the scenes things I could find here? And seeing as Disney threw this under the bus and apologized to China for how dare they make a movie about the Dalai Lama and Tibet, and basically this movie got railroaded because they dared to make a movie about Tibet and the Dalai Lama and not appease our mighty lord communist China, because you know Disney wants their money,
Of course.
so which I find really really sad, because this is a really fine film. Like it's Scorsese, and I definitely think this is worth a lot more attention than being like, oh, I'm sorry, we should never have made this, it was a mistake. Literally called it a mistake. So just figured I'd throw some of those thoughts out there, because it's not every day that we get to talk about a movie that literally the studio had to apologize to a whole entire country for, or had to. But I always like to start asking my guest, what interests you, Rowan, in coming on to talk about Kundun?
Well, the fact that I had never heard of it made it all the more interesting to me. And you know, I'm not incredibly familiar with Scorsese cinematography, but if you threw out a name of a Scorsese movie, I've more likely than not heard of it before. But Kundun, I had not. When I was exploring possible episodes to come onto the show for, I had heard of all of them actually, except Kundun, and that just made it all the more interesting to me. And then I did the bare bones amount of research. And I was in. I thought it was fascinating. My mom is like big on, you know, like spiritual stuff. Like she saw the Dalai Lama speak in Washington D.C. And when she actually watched this movie with me, and she was sort of given some commentary about and so that was quite interesting. But you know, like historical films about events that I maybe didn't know too much about. Like I knew the Dalai Lama had to flee Tibet, and that was really all I knew about the story. And so just to see, you know, a probably more honest look than we might have gotten earlier, or honestly later than that, I just think is quite interesting. And honestly, I'm surprised that Scorsese was the one that did this. I honestly would not have expected this from him.
And I think that going into my journey into the filmography of Scorsese, I would have thought the same. And then after watching all these films that have so much to do with religion and faith underneath, I'm just like, it only makes sense. And like, this is a man who made a movie about Jesus and made a lot of people angry. But also impressed a lot of people too. I guess it depends on who you talk to. And Silence was my number one film of 2016. So I thought it was really interesting taking a look at a film like this. And I guess, Rowan, what were some of the things that stood out to you the most that you appreciated about the film?
Well, first of all, I want to mention the production design. I thought the production design was off the charts, amazing. I have not done as much research as you probably have, Shane, so I do not know how much they actually like they shot, on location. I can assume it was a lot of it. Because it really does, make full use of the landscape
Yeah.
and the area. Do you know if they shot it actually in Tibet?
That is a good question. That I do not know. It's
Mhm.
interesting because I just read a whole entire book about Scorsese,
Right.
and it was published in 1991. So now I
Mhm.
have all of his perspective on every movie up until Cape Fear.
Right.
And then uh but you could definitely tell, like, it was so interesting because reading that book about Scorsese, Last Temptation of Christ, was such a big thing going to Morocco, because he's like, I'm used to shooting in halls and bars and like the streets of New York and stuff like that. And going out and filming something like this is a whole entire other kind of experience. He shot in Morocco, similar
Interesting.
to Last Temptation of Christ, which I think makes a lot of sense
Hmm.
because like it has that landscape and everything. But yeah, like this is definitely shot on location and it's gorgeous.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
have to drop a so I haven't gotten a chance to do this in a long time, is gush over Roger Deakins, because I did
Yep.
almost every single episode when I went through the Coen brothers. Um, but because up to this point, Bauhaus had been doing so much of the cinematography for Scorsese, seeing Deakins pop up and shoot this film, this is just a gorgeous looking film. The framing, the camera movements, how they capture the landscape, the colors. The colors in this film are
Hmm.
just eye-popping and gorgeous. And you could tell like some top-notch filmmaking. And it's no surprise when you have somebody like Scorsese and then Roger Deakins, who I would say is the greatest cinematographer of all time,
Hmm.
um, is something impressive and something to behold.
Yeah. And let's not forget to mention the score by Philip Glass, arguably one of the greatest living composers for film. My God, from the opening scene to the end, I was just floored by the music. Just like, I'm gonna confess something. I like this a lot more than I did The Age of Innocence, which was the last film I was
Mhm.
on here, and I think it's just a variety of factors, combined with the fact that I know I mentioned it on that episode, but period pieces aren't necessarily usually my thing, and there was. I'm assuming I'm sort of still figuring it out, that there was a reason that this film worked for me as a period piece when The Age of Innocence really didn't. And I think part of it is just the fact that Kundun showcases an entirely different culture with
Mhm.
entirely different beliefs and ideas. And this is a culture that is relatively foreign to me, that I do not know too much about, that I was learning about as the movie was progressing and as my mother was giving me information as we were watching. Um, and just the fact that this is just such this is so different from anything that I had known have known, and anything that I had grown up with. I just made it a more interesting experience, I think, is the
Mhm.
key word there. It was just more engaging for me because I could I have more of an inclination to pay attention to the little details,
Mhm.
because of the foreign aspect that I wouldn't really know. When in The Age of Innocence, not to keep bringing it back to that, but it's America a
Yeah.
couple hundred years ago. I've learned about it in school. Like I know a lot about the time period when this less than 100 years ago, but just halfway across the world,
Mhm.
or is just I just thought that was fascinating, and probably what made my experience as good as it was.
It's interesting that you brought up school and like learning about, like, obviously we know about America and stuff like that. I swear, after watching the beginning of this movie, that I've
Mhm.
seen the opening of this movie before.
Right.
And I'm pretty sure I watched this in 7th grade history class
Really?
because we learned about, it was all about global history. And like, I did a whole entire presentation on Buddha
Hmm.
and Buddhism in that class. And I remember learning about Tibet and like, it was this weird feeling of like, I've seen this scene before
Right.
with
Deja vu, the glitch in the Matrix.
well, and it was like, whoa, I just saw like the same cat. It's like, was it the exact same cat?
Right.
um, because the whole entire sequence with them, this man bringing the toys and the object to the Dalai Lama, and obviously like the reincarnation, it's like they were his because they were his in his other life. And I'm like, I remember watching this before. And it is so interesting. And one of the big differences, so like if we're gonna compare this to Age of Innocence, is Age of Innocence is always talking. There's always
Right.
narration, there's always characters. Like there's some use of quietness in this film and not
Mhm.
overdoing it, and just allowing you kind of to get lost in the visuals, the culture, and just what's going on screen. And a lot of the times it feels like Scorsese watching and learning and just appreciating what's going on culturally and religiously in this film. And I think that's such an interesting and engrossing way of presenting something that's going to be foreign to a lot of viewers who do watch this film. Unfortunately, not a whole lot of people watched this apparently when it came out.
Mhm.
But we already talked about that. But the thing is, it's like, this is what made this feel so special in a way, is that it's so beautiful. That score is off the charts.
Yeah.
Like I was sitting there like, I made a joke that it like the glass was sitting behind the burning piano. Like
Right. Yeah.
it's like he didn't have to go this hard, but
Mhm.
he did.
He did.
And it was such an impressive score. And I know that's what got a lot of the attention for this film, the score, the cinematography from Deakins. And it's, I saw some comparisons from this and Last Temptation of Christ in the terms of like Jesus presented in a very human and raw and potential, like a very humanistic way. I feel like this film really does show like the Dalai Lama as like a pure person. And I saw some people comparing like that's why this is maybe not as interesting as
Mhm.
Last Temptation of Christ. And you're kind of maybe at a little bit of an arm's length from him because like he is presented in that way. But it's still such an interesting story. It is a pretty, I feel like it's a pretty straightforward biopic
Mhm.
presentation, but all the trappings around it are done in such an impressive, heightened way that it brings the film up. And little shout out to the interesting scene that he has with Chairman Mao. I thought
Mhm.
that was such an interesting scene to show that. And a little fun fact, when I looked up some of the cast, the actor who played Mal was one of the dads in School of Rock.
I did see that he's one of the few actors in this film who has done other mainstream movies.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I really love the scene you're talking about where Mao tells the Dalai Lama that religion is poison,
Yep.
and I just think like that line in particular just encapsulates the entire conflict of the film into one little bit, which I think is just fantastic. And this actually happened. I mean, I'm sure there was some creative liberties and licenses taken, but I read for the most part that it's pretty accurate to the Dalai Lama's autobiography,
Mm-hmm.
and it's and just the fact that that line "religion is poison" is really how it is really what it boiled down to. China did not want Tibet to have a religious leader
Mm-hmm.
because they did not want religion and their communism clashing,
Yep.
and I just think it's just so fascinating that it's it almost seems too like it almost seems like a perfect storm in the way this conflict comes about, and it's crazy that that's the way that it actually happened, and the way that it's still happening, and the fact that at the end of this film it says the Dalai Lama has still not returned to Tibet, is confident he still will, and that is unfortunately still true. And it seeing that just broke my heart, that in almost 30 years that hasn't changed. And
yeah, because like this came out in 97, and the fact that like thinking about that, this is 25 years old. Dating myself here. But like it's here's the thing, it's like it might have some familiar biopic kind of storytelling, but this is just such a fascinating story that it can't help but be fascinating in the hands of such talented creators like Scorsese and Deakins. And they're able to take a cast which is mostly like, I guess, I know a couple of the actors were relatives of the Dalai Lama. So like they weren't even actors. And being able to get such a moving and interesting experience out of this. And I appreciate it because like it did remind me of Silence a lot. Scorsese going against what his normal urges are to really fill up a scene. Because like there's a lot of his films are like sharp dialogue, music, just everything going on, quick editing and like fast-paced montages and stuff like that. This takes its time and soaks in the beauty of the film, the importance of the story, and the faith-based themes of the film, and really connecting with that and seeing a man grow up into this role of being leaned on by a whole entire nation, and then being forced to leave his own nation because of greater forces. And it's one of those kinds of films where it's just like, you don't know how special of an experience it can be until you sit there and watch it. And like, I don't think this is one of Scorsese's best films, because like, I think it does still fall into like, it's pretty straightforward narrative. It's played out pretty simply, but like, there's just an added layer there that's going to connect with you and has a lot to think about and to process. And you can dig as deep into it as you want, thinking about faith. And I appreciate, Rowan, you bring up that line of like religion is poison, because that's the whole entire idea of, because in a government system like that, you can't afford to have any other authority pulling away from your authority. And where do a lot of people turn besides their nations? Their religion. And that's exactly what he didn't want. And that scene plays out so perfectly. And it's just impeccable filmmaking.
Yeah. Of all of the scenes, that was the one that stuck with me the most. And afterward, when Mao walks the Dalai Lama to his car, I asked my mom, why doesn't Mao have any bodyguards around? Why is he just sort of walking out on the street? And my mom was like, I don't know. And I don't know. There's no deeper meaning there. I just thought that was weird. But yeah, just the way, Mao, I think, appears in like 2 scenes maybe. And but because of who we know he is historically, his character and his scenes carry all the more weight, and have all the more impact because of who he is. And like I just think that that's fascinating. And how the genre and the attitude of the film sort of informs how we're supposed to feel about these characters. I'll use The Kingsman, the recent Kingsman spinoff, as a comparison. That is very much a more comedic, ridiculous action film. So when Tsar Nicholas or when Rasputin are on screen, it's not sort of a, like, oh my God, look at them, they are the big historical figures. It's a look at what crazy crap they are doing, and look how crazy insane this is. But with Mao in Kundun, it's almost to the point of scary when he is on screen speaking so calmly, when he's complimenting the Dalai Lama, and all of a sudden he says religion is poison, and the entire tide of the conversation, the scene, the movie, honestly, changes, because we, as the viewers, knowing who Mao is from history, we know what his true motives are. But up until that point, he had been portrayed in the film as being very kind and very nice and respectful toward the Dalai Lama. And then when he shows his true colors, we as the viewers are validated in knowing who he is, because now the Dalai Lama in the film realizes it too.
Well, and it's so interesting that one character can represent the antithesis of the whole entire film and all of its themes, because it's like, bringing up the song Imagine, which I don't know if everybody really listens too close about what that song's about, but like obviously John Lennon's singing about like this like communist utopian kind of society, and one of the lines is literally like, imagine if there were no religion, because like that's not a part of it, because in like a communist society you don't want religion, because that's another force that could disrupt the balance that's supposed to be in that society. Obviously, most communist countries didn't necessarily turn out as communist, much more authoritarian. And obviously Mao was very much that, and did a lot of things to a lot of people and hurt a lot of people. And you bring up a good point of like, you carry that baggage into this film.
Right.
It's like, not as serious as of a film, but the second they show Hitler on screen in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, you know what weight that has.
Right.
It's a whole other kind of thing. And like the film even stops dead in its tracks. Because it's like, even just, and it's because Mao has such a specific look to him. It's like, you could just look at that character and be like, I know exactly who this is. And it speaks volumes, and they don't have to show him having people killed or anything like that. They could have him just be really calm and then just throw that one little line out that makes the Dalai Lama realize, I'm in trouble. And that is that jumping off point in the film where he realizes he has to leave. And leading up to, like, this film ends with him leaving Tibet. And us getting that message about how he hasn't returned since. And it's crazy to think about, like, this man's been living his whole entire life since then away from his people, away from his nation, and not having a safe place to go back home to. And it's interesting thinking about like what like China is today, and the fact that this movie came out 25 years ago, and you have things like, it was literally the like CEO of Disney apologizing to China, similar to like, do you remember when John Cena had to apologize to China?
Yeah, for calling Taiwan a country. Yeah. I more remember Stephen Colbert's parody of that more than the actual apology, but yeah.
And like, this is, and like, not to say that like John Cena is like a super culturally important person. Like, this is a rich man who in no means needs to like be conceding to anybody, and then gets thrown out there. It's like, now you got to apologize to China because we need that money.
Yeah.
Universal's like, what did you do? You go out there and you say you're sorry.
You made a human mistake.
And it's so interesting that such a film could have that kind of impact. And I think out of all the films that I've watched so far, there's definitely like camera movements and stuff like that in the film that really say Scorsese. But in general, this really does feel like a film that is something different and unexpected from him. And I think it's a pretty special and interesting film. It's not his, I don't think it's one of his greatest films, but I definitely think it's worth checking out.
Yeah, absolutely. I am very glad that you offered this to me as one of the potential episodes. I am extremely glad that I saw this. There are a lot of Scorsese's that I have not seen. Many of his most famous films I have not seen yet, but I am quite glad that I was able to watch this one. And I may not ever have heard of it, honestly. And so yeah, so thank you for that.
Absolutely. I know I'm going to be having a Departed party and Wolf of Wall Street party because a lot of people want to talk about those movies.
Those are two of them that I have never seen.
I remember buying The Departed for like a couple of dollars at the Princeton Record Exchange my freshman year of college and watching that in my dorm room for the first time and losing my mind by the end of the movie, where I was literally like screaming in my dorm room at the TV. And then
if that doesn't set the tone.
I had such a visceral reaction to that movie, and I got so hooked into it. It's such an entertaining movie, and I feel like it gets underrepresented because it's the movie that he won Best Director for and Best Picture for, that everyone's like, well, he should have won it for other movies. I'm like, don't discredit The Departed. This is a great movie.
Right.
And then Wolf of Wall Street was a crazy 3-hour ride in the theater when I went to go see that.
It's just a matter of setting aside the 3 hours at this point.
And it is quite a ride. But those are all of our thoughts on Kundun. So now we're going to phase into our last part of the show where we talk about some recommendations. So Rowan, what would you like to recommend to all these lovely people?
Well, I am, I'm perpetually working down my list of shame of many, many years. I was born too late, but regardless, I am going to talk this week about Midnight in Paris. My first Woody Allen movie, which surprised me. I was sure that I had seen a Woody Allen movie before. But yeah, my mom told me this was a great place to start. And I agree. I really, really love Midnight in Paris. Just the romanticism of the city of love. I have been to Paris once in my life. I do want to go back. I went when I was I believe I was 11 years old, quite unruly, quite rowdy. And just seeing Owen Wilson walk around the streets of Paris at midnight in the present time, in the 1920s, in the 1890s, it just brings about a certain feeling that you don't get from many places, and just to get that feeling while watching it on a screen is something like truly impressive, and something that you might never think is possible. But if you don't think that's possible, you haven't seen Midnight in Paris. The supporting cast is great here. Just the 1920s is, I'm just going to say it, it's my favorite decade. The Great Gatsby is one of my favorite books. I love the history from that time, and just the stories, pre-depression, pre-stock market crash. Everything just sounded so amazing and so great and so fun. Granted, the part they portray in pop culture is the fun part. It's the flashy part. It's the exciting part. And they don't show, honestly, the human misery that has existed in every decade since the dawn of time. But just the picture of the 1920s that pop culture paints is just so beautiful and so gorgeous, and I think Midnight in Paris portrays it perfectly. So yeah.
And honestly, I think that's this Woody Allen film that hit me the hardest, that I had the most fun with, because I've seen Annie Hall, I've seen Manhattan, Hannah and Her Sisters. I've seen some of his newer ones as well that didn't hit so well. But Midnight in Paris was something special. I was really impressed by that movie, and wow.
Very good, very good.
Enjoying Owen Wilson, and was it Corey Stoll is
Hemingway. Tom Hiddleston as F. Scott Fitzgerald. Kathy Bates is Gloria Stein.
Yeah, and it's just such a great cast of characters, and it's just a wonderful experience, and I just loved it so much. And it's a really charming film, and it has a very interesting and prophetic message of us always romanticizing other eras, and he goes back to the 20s, and they're like, oh, I hate the 20s. I just wish I could be in like the 1870s. And it's just
Right.
like
Right.
like everybody kind of has that feeling of like a different time that you didn't get to experience. And we experience our time in its entirety.
Right.
You could choose to look back and look at the interesting and fun things of a particular era. And like, I could say like I love the 70s. I would love to go to a disco and stuff like that, but I would also miss, technology and all the things that like today has. Now, I have a couple of recommendations. So one new film that I watched that blew me away and I had no expectations of this is The House, which is on Netflix. And this is a anthology film of 3 stop motion animated short films. And the first one, with all of its felt characters, are disturbing to look at. And honestly, that first third of that movie is one of the scariest and unnerving things that I've watched in movies in a long time.
Wow.
I'm like, wait a minute. Because like I didn't know what this was about really. I just knew it was stop motion animation, and in some of the stories there's anthropomorphic rats and cats, and did not expect this to be a very adult movie. Mm-hmm. And started picking up on that very quickly when there's a lot of horror elements in the first one. And I had such a visceral reaction to the second one that I don't feel like I've had since the third act of Mother.
Wow.
And I'm just like, it's one of those things where it's just like, what else can go wrong? And then the last piece is like a very prophetic and interesting kind of thematic story that isn't there to like ratchet up horror tension, but it's pretty meaningful and moving little story. And like, this is such an interesting thing that just popped up on Netflix. And we're just like, got a Netflix gem right there. It's actually my number 1 film of 2022 so far. Wow. Just blew me out of the water.
Yeah,
and
I was sorry to interrupt. No. I was going to watch this earlier today, but my brother and I ended up watching Friday the 13th Part 2 as we're working our way through the franchise, and our schedules line up so little these days, and so we figured we'd take advantage of it. But now that I wanted to watch The House anyway, but now with that glowing recommendation, I will definitely make it a priority.
It's creepy.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, what's going on here? It's such a weird movie too. Speaking of weird,
I can't wait.
So I have a subscription to Mubi, and I've gotten some really great gems out of that. And I got a chance to watch the Jabberwocky yesterday, which is nice. Terry Gilliam's film, which like he followed up Monty Python and the Holy Grail with. And does the narrative always like stay focused and engaged? Probably not, but few Terry Gilliam films do. And I'm a huge fan of his, but it's so funny. And also the climactic confrontation with the Jabberwocky is crazy. And it's such a crazy, fun fantasy ride that I just had a blast with. And then one of my movies that I rewatched yesterday was actually 1408. And I feel like this is a little horror film that gets overlooked a lot with John Cusack and Samuel L. Jackson, about this horror writer that like goes into these places and he's like, oh, I'm going to spend a night in this creepy place. And it's like room 1408 at like the Dolphin Hotel. It's just like, no, you don't want to deal with this. And it's so, John Cusack's great. It has this great dark sense of humor about it. And, Samuel L. Jackson as exposition dump character is always great. If you could get Samuel L. Jackson to read your exposition, so much better.
Of course. Yeah.
So it's like, don't do it. I'm just like, I will listen to that man. What are you doing? But that was, I think, the second or third time I've watched that. I'm like, it's a really enjoyable horror film. And also has like a big heart to it too. There's some moving moments in it because like this author has like a tragic past, because of course. But it's an interesting film if you haven't seen it. But those are some recommendations for all you people. So you have plenty of great movies to go check out. So go watch them. But Rowan, thank you again for coming on. And I'm going to give you one last chance to shamelessly plug what you would like to shamelessly plug to our lovely audience.
Why, thank you. So as I mentioned before, I have a blog and a podcast. That's The Lenient Critic, Lenient. I understand it could be a tough word. Um, I also have a YouTube channel where I make my own films. I am currently editing the culmination film to all of the other things that I've done in the last few years. That is going to be over 3 hours long, so it will be released in multiple parts. So that
Endgame?
Essentially, basically, yeah, except better than Endgame. But I know. So the YouTube channel is The Screen Avenger. I wish I could change it. I no longer like the name, but oh well, I'm stuck with it. Yeah, I post films, and I'm right now doing a commentary series where I go back with some friends who haven't seen my other projects, and we're watching all of them in preparation for the big finale.
Nice.
So that's coming out weekly. But yeah, so the Screen Avenger YouTube channel, the Lenient Critic blog and podcast, and I also write for SiftPop, which is pretty fun. I have not been on the SiftPop Writers Room podcast yet, but I will be quite soon. So I'm very excited about that.
What episode are you coming on for?
I am going to be on the episode that will hopefully talk about Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness in the coming attractions.
Nice.
Hopefully, I really hope it doesn't get pushed, because that's the entire reason I chose that episode. But we'll see.
I've been on a few times. I did a couple of episodes talking about TV shows and stuff like that, the TV binge.
Yeah.
But Alice and I are going to be on a special episode. We're going to give out the Academy Awards from last year all over again and see if a year later they got it right. I'm sure there's a lot of feelings to talk about the actual Academy Awards from last year.
Yeah.
So Alice is like, warn you, this is going to be a 5-hour show.
Well, speaking of super long shows involving Alice, she is, we recorded this a couple days ago. She is on my most anticipated film and television of 2022 episode of the Lenient Critic podcast. And we recorded for almost 3 hours. Because we are nerds that like to talk about nerdy things. So that will come out beginning of February. So.
Yeah, Alice was just on Lost in the Wasteland. I always have a lot of fun chatting with stuff with Alice. Yeah. She sold me hard on this one book, and I'm like, I have to buy this.
Oh, really?
Like, must read book.
Nice.
Now that I'm trying to get back into reading, I will be having a review of this lovely graphic novel here that my brother bought me, coming out shortly, because I finished this yesterday.
Very nice.
That's what we have for you this week. And next week's show, we're going to be taking a dive into another not so super well-known Scorsese film, Bring Out the Dead, starring Nick Cage. And sold. I don't even need to know what this movie's about. I'm ready to go.
We only need the cast. The first name.
Scorsese, Nick Cage. Bam.
There we go.
Done. But so I'll be chatting with Foster about that one. But Rowan, thank you again for coming on. And thank all of you out there for always tuning in and supporting your Wasteland Reviewer.